What was the scariest, we need to leave now gut feeling that you've ever experienced? Story 1. Me and my little sister went camping in the woods very close to our house when we were kids. We'd seen this bald guy with a blue shirt and a dog walking around, which isn't unusual for the area. You'll often see people walking and say hello. For some reason, though, I just got this tight feeling in my chest, and my sister must have too, because we both just gave each other this look. I don't know what it was that made me do it. This is very out of character for me. But I took a photo of the back of him as he was walking away. A while later, we see the same guy again near the lake. He comes over and asks about the tent we're carrying, where we'll be setting up. And are we camping with our dad? We say yes, we're just going to see him now. A lie. We must have had the same moment of psychicness, because we walked off up a fork in the path until we were out of view, then looked at each other and jumped down a path hidden by the bushes and waited behind them on the parallel trail for a bit. The guy watched us walk off, pretended to play with his dog until he couldn't see us, then turned around and ran up the path after us. Thankfully, he didn't see us hidden and carried on up straight where he thought we'd gone. We decided camping was a bad idea and went home. That evening, my mom shows us a post in the local residents group, which is a picture of the same bald guy trying to break into someone's house. Apparently, he'd just been walking around trying people's front doors and claimed to be a repair guy when he was stopped. I dread to fucking think what his intentions were, but it was very lucky me and my sister knew those woods so well, otherwise we wouldn't have thought to go down one of the hidden paths. Story 2. I was in Taco Bell with my daughter, and I saw a guy come in and back out with a t-shirt over his hand. I told her to dump her tray and get moving. We went out to the car quickly and left. Found out later on the news that the guy robbed the place with the gun hiding under his t-shirt. Story 3. I was 12 at the time, and my favorite thing in the world was spending the night at my grandma's house. We lived in the sticks at the time, and my grandma lived closer to the nearest town. Thursday night was grandma's night. I felt something off one Thursday night and asked my mom if I could just stay home with my mom and dad. They reluctantly agreed. I went home, watched some TV, and went to bed. My bedroom was on the adjoining wall to the living room. I wasn't really asleep, but I heard my mom keep saying my dad's name over and over again with a hint of panic. I sneak out to the living room, and my dad is on the couch with his head tilted back, snoring really loud, which wasn't uncommon, but my mom was beside him, shaking him and telling him to wake up. She yelled at me to go back to bed. I didn't, obviously. I snuck to their bedroom to call 911. I told the dispatcher that my dad was asleep and my mom was trying to wake him up, but she couldn't. Eventually, the phone call went to the living room and my mom talked to the dispatcher. They sent an ambulance to the middle of nowhere. My dad had taken a bottle of diazepam to try to commit suicide. I remember sitting on the floor and holding his hand and repeating over and over that I loved him. The ambulance came and took him to the hospital. Lights and sirens the whole way. We didn't know what happened during that time, but we found out a day or so later, and that is when our world changed. I am very sure if I did not call 911 that night, that my dad would have succeeded, and it would have probably have drove my mom over the edge as well. And I have no idea why I didn't want to stay the night at my nanny's. I just had that feeling that I needed to go home. Story 4 years ago when I was still living at home with the parents, I drove home around 2 a.m. As I parked my car, I noticed a man walking down the street. I decided to wait until he passed my car and was far enough for me to get out, however. Instead, he passed my car and hid behind the van that was directly parked behind me. I guess he did not think I was paying attention to him, so I called my dad, who was asleep, to come down and get me. He did. And when the guy saw my dad, he immediately ran away. I was lucky. Story 5. My brother and I were kids, playing hide and seek in the front yard of our house. My brother was 3, and I was 6. My brother was supposed to be counting and finding me, but he was taking forever. So I peeked around the side of the house to see what was taking so long. He had lost interest in the game and was standing near the front gate, which led to the street. As I'm looking, I see a brown car pull up with 2 men inside. The car wasn't familiar, and neither were the men. They both got out of the car and approached my brother. They started asking him questions and moving closer to him. I remember feeling panicked. I had learned about stranger danger in school and knew this wasn't right. I ran around the side of the house, flew through the back door, and screamed, "Someone is trying to kidnap Steve!" My dad didn't hesitate. He got up and flew through the front door. When the men saw my dad coming through the door, they bolted and peeled out. From that day forward, we weren't allowed to play in the front yard anymore. It's a really scary memory for me. Story 6. Does an "I need to go home now" feeling count? And it wasn't me, but my mom. Anyway, I was around 12 or so, and my mom left to run an errand, leaving me alone. Very soon after she left, the doorbell rang. This was weird because we lived on a hill with only 2 neighbors. We all kept to ourselves, and we just didn't get random visitors. Thanks to some conveniently placed picture frames, I could see out the door without being seen. I look out and see a young man I don't recognize. He's dressed in a shirt and jeans, and something just feels off. So I ignore him and wait for him to leave. But he doesn't. He lingers and starts smoking. Again, this is an isolated hill. I'm alone, and now I'm getting scared. I go and hide and plan to wait for my mom, except she just left, had a few errands to run, and I couldn't reach the phone without the guy seeing me. As I'm trying to figure out what to do, my mom comes home. She runs in and asks if I'm okay. Apparently she got this random go home now urge. She hadn't even run her first errand yet, but turned around immediately, found the guy in our yard and asked what he needed. I guess he muttered something about looking for someone, or something to that effect, and my mom told him to leave. Apparently he was acting very strangely and made my mom nervous. To this day I have no idea what he wanted, and no idea how my mom knew to come home. But I am very grateful she did. Story 7. Wednesday midday, run along a beautiful river pathway near my apartment block. About 1 kilometer in, I felt people watching me and directly turned around and ran home, even though I did not see anybody. Closed the 2 magnetic gates leading up to my door and didn't see anybody around or follow me. About 10 minutes later, 2 guys were at my front door trying to push it in. I was luckily on the other side of the door at that moment and pushed it back closed with all my force and began screaming. I managed to security lock the front door and text my apartment block for help. I was on the 2nd floor, and they obviously watched which apartment I went into. Looking back at the apartment's security cameras, they were able to see the 2 guys pull apart the magnetic security gates. 2 of them. The block then quickly changed the gates to a mechanic lock that cannot be pulled apart. Story 8. I bartend, and years ago I kicked this guy out because he was acting very strange, muttering under his breath that he would kill my other customers. Just really hostile. He had missing fingers on one hand, and he was kind of a bigger guy. After bar close, I was almost finished counting money, so like an hour after everyone left, and I was just about to leave, and I had that gut feeling. I looked out the window, and that guy was standing on the corner watching me in a ski mask. I know it was him because of the build. As soon as I grabbed my phone, he took off, but the cops know who he is. Now he has a vendetta out against me, and he's well known around town. He's fucking nuts. Story 9. I stopped by a friend's house to watch a ball game. He, his wife, and I were just relaxing, and someone knocked on the door. It was the middle of the afternoon. He opened it up. He was expecting others might come by also. I hear him greeting someone. The guy was his brother. I had never met, but had heard about. Very sketchy-looking guy, meth teeth, scrawny, long, greasy hair. My friend had told me that he had a brother who lived in the area who had a serious drug problem. Buddy is talking to his brother about nothing, and the guy gets a call on his cell, whoever called. All he told them was, "Not yet. I'll call you later." Seems pretty obvious this guy has come to rob and most likely to take out witnesses. I look at my buddy. It seems he has come to the same conclusion. Now my buddy's wife is a no-nonsense type of woman. Sweet but athletic. On the tall side, she had left the room to go to the bathroom, or so she said. She comes back in the room with a handgun. I'm thinking, WTF did I walk into? But she calmly says, "Ron, you're strung out and came here with bad intentions. You need to quietly leave. If you get any ideas, Chris, their son, is sitting outside in his truck to make sure you go." Ron doesn't say a word. He just turns and goes out the door. We can hear his old pickup drive away rapidly. Chris come in and says, "He's gone. I don't think he's coming back." They ask me to leave so they can decide what to do. They have already called the police, who are well acquainted with Ron. The next morning, my buddy calls me. The police said they found his brother in the trailer park where he lived, murdered with multiple gunshots. They are guessing he was in serious drug debt and had come to rob his brother. I told my buddy I was sorry. He said, "Don't be." Story 10 years ago. I was at a club with some friends. I was at the bar and for some reason looked down at the other end of the bar and saw 2 guys quietly arguing. They tried to keep from being overheard, but I saw their agitated face. I went back to my group of friends and told them we should go. This was a popular club, and it took us forever to get in, so they didn't want to leave. I don't know what came over me, but I picked up my friend's girlfriend, she was barely 5 tall, and started walking to the door. She was kicking the entire time, and the rest of the party followed me outside, telling me to put her down. When we got outside, we heard the distant pop pop and people screaming. We looked at each other for a second, then ran for our cars. I forgot to put her down and was still carrying her over my shoulders. Update. Dang, I didn't think this would blow up. It was the early 1990s, and we were at a club in Miami. If I recall correctly from the local news, it was a drug deal that went bad between two groups. No one was killed, but they wounded each other and a couple of innocent people. LOL, I'm still not carrying her today. The legend are false. Those two eventually got married, and they mentioned me in their speech. Something about the other groomsmen holding me back so that I don't get the urge to carry her across the doorway. Story 11. Sitting in my friend's backyard with their two kids, my husband, and another friend enjoying pizza that my host made. It was a beautiful, clear day with no real wind. We're having a great time, just out of the pool and hungry for pizza, when I suddenly felt on edge. I looked straight at the kids, about 8 and 10 or so years old, and just said, "Get in the house." We all scramble, and a second later we heard creaking, and maybe 5 seconds after it started, this big branch fell off of their pine tree onto the table where we were sitting. Thankfully, no one was hurt besides having to pick pine needles out of our pizza. I can only assume that I subconsciously heard the branch starting to give. Story 12. When we were in our teens, my sister and I were walking our dog in our local forest area very close to our childhood home. We were about to leave and had just clipped our dog back up when a lady appeared out of nowhere and started chatting to us. She was odd. She told us her dog would love some socialization with our dog, and could we go back with her for 5 minutes? What I hadn't clocked, but my sister had, was that her dog was nowhere to be seen. The lady was almost rounding us up to head back towards the forest when, little did I know, my sister had spotted a van out of the corner of her eye. I was still oblivious at this point. Suddenly my sister screams, "Dad!" And to our luck, my dad had finished work and was now out on a run. He starts waving and running towards us, and as we turn back around, the lady had vanished. My sister looks back over at the van and sees the lady closing the passenger door, and it's speeding off. Dog still nowhere to be seen. I believe we were minutes away from abduction. It was divine intervention that my dad happened to be at the right place at the right time. Story 13. Many years ago, I went with my then-girlfriend to one of her female friends' houses, who was married to a guy I'd never met before. I'll call them Jack and Jill so I can tell the story a little easier. We played cards with them for a couple hours, and it was a good time besides an odd feeling I had the whole time I was there. Something just didn't sit right with me being there with them in their home. The best I can explain it is that I was having an anxiety, nervous-like feeling, but having no reason to feel that way. After leaving, I told my girlfriend the feeling I had and that I didn't think we should go back there again because something wasn't right. Fast forward several months to a year or so later, I forget the exact timeline, Jack murders Jill in that same home, Mag dumping her with his semi-automatic pistol before killing himself with one of the last rounds. No motive. Really horrible stuff that sent shockwaves through the community. And it's the only time I've ever had that feeling. Story 14. A friend called me and said, "There's a wildfire 8 miles away, can you help me move my horses?" So I drove down. She was wrong, it's 8 miles by car. Under 2 as the crow flies. We got the first set of horses out and down to another farm. The second set I'm working on, and suddenly things get quiet. It's as if the world stopped for a minute. I look at the horse, and the horse looks like it's ready to run. I take a deep breath, and suddenly, the noise comes back. The wind is hot, AF, and the light changes. I told Sherry, the girl I'm helping, "We gotta go now. No time to shove the horses into the trailer, they are smart enough to survive," and I let them loose. We run to the truck, and the barn is already on fire. Then, we get in the truck and notice the fire past us and is blocking the road. So we jump out and ran to a small pond for the horses, and we dive in, hoping the fire doesn't burn us. It was about 20 minutes of hell. It might have been longer, IDK. It was insanely scary, hot and loud. We got rescued by the fire department's water-dropping helicopter. It landed in the field and pulled us in. We got lucky. The truck was burned to the frame, and the horse Sherry let go died. The one I let go survived but was burned. That's most likely the scariest moment. Story 15. My wife and I used to live in rural exurb outside a large metropolitan area. We were on an interstate about halfway between the city and our home when my wife, who was 6 months pregnant, started having contractions. At the next off-ramp, I turned around and headed back towards the city, planning on heading for an ER. I took the very first exit on the outskirts of the city. It was pretty desolate. The only thing on the 2-lane road were a couple of rock quarries that were empty after dark. There wasn't much light on the winter-darkened evening. I pulled into a gravel turnout just south of the off-ramp, pulled to a stop, leaving the engine running, and turned my full attention to my wife. A few minutes passed before my attention was grabbed by a car parked across the turnout, turning their headlights on with high beams. My wife grabbed my arm and said, "We've got to get out of here." And I was like, "Yeah." So I dropped it in gear and hauled ass down that 2-lane road towards the city. The other car gave chase for a while, but I was flooring my car. I drove a Dodge Stratus. Eventually, we got into civilization and the other car turned around and fucked off. We spent the night in the hospital, narrowly avoiding the premature birth of my son. He's 17 now. We guessed I didn't notice that my headlights were shining on a drug handoff, my attention being on my wife, and it pissed the other people off. But who knows? Crazies are everywhere. Story 16. We were driving back from an impromptu family vacation. My husband and I were both driving cars. Too many people, not enough alert drivers, and I was following him. We were in the left lane passing a truck, and I suddenly had an overwhelming feeling that we needed to slow way down and move over immediately. I called him and told him that we needed to get over, go slower than the truck, and turn our hazards on. He thought I was a little crazy, but he's learned to listen to my gut feelings, and did it. Suddenly, we ran into a freak ice storm, and the truck slipped off the road. The car that went past us on the left slid into oncoming traffic, and 3 other cars behind us proceeded to slide off the road. There was a big dip on the side of the road, and one of the cars even tipped over. We somehow came through unscathed and made it home safely. Another time, I was driving to work, and I was behind a work van with ladders on top of it. It wasn't particularly busy on the highway, but someone was behind me somewhat close. I had a horrible feeling wash over me that I needed to move over right away. I moved 1 lane over about 15 seconds before one of the ladders flew off the van. It hit the road right next to me, and the car that was behind me ran over it a little, but luckily wasn't impaled or anything. I've had this feeling several times in my life and have even canceled entire vacations over it. I don't know if anything would have happened for several of them, but I truly think I've avoided some serious trouble.